I posted a photo of Andrew Basiago, who in 1972 went back to see Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, and the response was terrible. Almost everyone who gave it a thumbs down, as if to say this didn't happen. Andrew Basiago is an attorney today, practices in the state of Washington. Articulate, cogent, and credible. Not incredible, he is credible. I'm going to read you an article. I did a search. Here is the search I did. Basiago and Gettysburg were the only two words I used. 6,000 web pages. The second link on the Google Advanced Search, top line, meaning each word must appear on the page. The second link, executiveproducer.posterous.com, posted November 13, 2010. This is the article I'm reading. Let's get started. Andrew Basiago talks about Lincoln at Gettysburg. There's a photo of Lincoln. Andrew D. Basiago has emerged with evidence that secret U.S. time travel technologies were used as early as 1971 to acquire first-hand documentary knowledge about September 11, 2001, fully 3 decades before the horrific events of that fateful day. Mr. Basiago, a child participant in DARPA's time travel program, Project Pegasus, has publicly stated how in 1971 he viewed moving images of the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001 that had been obtained from the future and brought back to the early 1970s. DARPA is the chief research and development arm of the U.S. military. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, created the precursor to the Internet, ARPANET, and has a penchant for trumpeting its advances, such as putting surveillance cameras on the backs of bumblebees and other exotic achievements in military science. Mr. Basiago claims that DARPA's secret technical accomplishments go far beyond what it has publicly acknowledged, and that by 1970 DARPA had achieved teleportation-based time travel, as well as advanced electro-optical means of discerning past and future events via different technologies that provide quantum access. Mr. Basiago has described how, while serving in Project Pegasus, he viewed moving images of 9/11 at the secured U.S. Defense Technical Facility, where they were processed after being retrieved from the future, the Aerojet Corporation facility that once stood at the corner of Bullock Avenue and Leroy Place in Socorro, New Mexico. According to Mr. Basiago's whistleblowing testimony, Donald H. Rumsfeld, the sitting U.S. Secretary of Defense on September 11, 2001, was the defense attaché to Project Pegasus during the early 1970s when Rumsfeld was officially serving as a counselor to President Nixon and member of his Board of Wage and Price Stabilization. In all likelihood, Mr. Rumsfeld, as the defense attaché to Project Pegasus, would have known about and possibly had control over the data about 9/11 derived via quantum access and brought back to the early 70s for analysis by the DARPA Research and Development Program under his administrative authority. Mr. Basiago's eyewitness account that Secretary Rumsfeld and others knew about 9/11 decades in advance because data about it was gathered via DARPA's secret time travel program unlocks several of the more enigmatic facts in the 9/11 literature and may be the key to society's unraveling of the ultimate accountability for the false flag operation that took place on September 11, 2001. We will explore Mr. Basiago's whistleblower eyewitness evidence regarding how secret U.S. government time travel technologies relate to 9/11 in future installments of this series. Corroborative evidence of Andrew Basiago's secret U.S. government time travel. Corroborative documentary evidence of the veracity of Mr. Basiago's time travel expeditions on behalf of the U.S. government exists. This documentary evidence consists of a photograph of Mr. Basiago taken at the scene of the U.S. President Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863, after he was teleported to that location in the time-space continuum via DARPA time travel technology. And then there is an audio recording, Coast to Coast AM, November 11, 2010, Hour 3. Now, George Noory is talking to Andrew Basiago about Gettysburg, and I want to play that for you because it's interesting. Thank you for listening. Here's the recording.
You're there as a spectral presence in that time and place, but not there entirely physically. And that's what chronovision was achieving, and a later technology called plasma confinement, which they were using to get me to Gettysburg in 1863.
And let's talk about Gettysburg. We've got this incredible photograph that you gave us. It's up there on the coasttocoastam.com website. Explain that and why Gettysburg. Why'd they send you back there? Actually,
it took place in the spring of 1972. I was taken to a time lab in East Hanover, New Jersey, under the direction of Dr. Sterling Colgate. Dr. Colgate was then serving as the president of New Mexico Tech, the New Mexico School of Science and Technology. He had developed a methodology called plasma confinement, where the time traveler stands in a chamber, a clear lucite chamber, and walks into a cloud of plasma and is essentially wormholed to a past location. In fact, that was the only time that I was involved in actual wormholing, where as I was moving through the quantum plenum, I was moving through a series of arching tunnels that were sort of chaotic as I moved onto my destination. The reason that I was invited to go there was essentially as a reward for performing so well in the project. My father and Dr. Colgate asked me whether I wanted to go see Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address. They thought it was going to be a great thrill for me to do that. But in fact, I was thinking back to my history education in the program and also my conventional schooling and imagining that 1863 portrait of Abraham Lincoln by Alexander Gardner, where he looks basically like a chimpanzee in a black suit. And I was terrified by the notion of seeing Abraham Lincoln as he might appear during his life. It was sort of a Boo Radley moment in my childhood to even contemplate. So I actually begged off, and Dr. Colgate said, well, Ray, to my father, well, Ray, let's come back in 2 weeks and ask Andy whether he wants to go. So my dad drove me up again, up Ridgedale Avenue, up to the time lab in East Hanover, and they asked me the same question. And really, to please my dad, I said, sure, I'd like to go and go see the Gettysburg Address. So a woman named Valerie, I remember her first name, dressed me as a Union bugle boy, and I was invited to enter the plasma confinement chamber. Actually, before that, my dad took a pen or pencil, rather, and he had a kind of a mimeograph of an 1863 map of Gettysburg. And he showed me that there was a north-south arterial through the heart of Gettysburg that in the northwest branched off on another road. And they were going to put me down via plasma confinement right on the side of that road so that I could ask a passerby which way Gettysburg was and then walk straight into town, into the very sort of minimal downtown that then existed, where Lincoln was going to be giving the Gettysburg Address on a dais about 3 feet off the ground, right in front of the cemetery there. So I walked inside the chamber. I walked into the cloud of plasma under confinement, and I had this hellacious journey to Gettysburg where actually my hat was ripped off, both of my shoes, and one of my socks. Oh. And I popped into view next to that road northwest of Gettysburg. I could smell ozone. I was feverish. I was then reacting to the rather brisk autumn air, and I realized I only had one sock on. So my training took over, and I sat down, and I pulled off the other sock and threw it into the bushes, because I figured if I'm going to be walking into Gettysburg barefoot, I should be entirely barefoot. So I then began walking without a hat. I didn't have a jacket. I was just dressed in the jersey of a Union bugle boy, no shoes. I met a gaunt teenage soldier, a Union soldier, walking along the side of the road, and I yelled to him, as my father had instructed me, "Hey, friend, which way Gettysburg?" And this individual stopped and squared his shoulders in the direction I was going and pointed that way. You're going in the right direction. So I spent about, I would say, 20 minutes walking past farmhouses and really utterly shivering in the cold autumn air. And I got into downtown Gettysburg, and I thought, I better find some warmer clothing here, because I'm not going to be able to stand seeing Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address.
And how long are you supposed to be there?
I beg your pardon?
How long are you supposed to be there before they yank you back?
I was expecting expecting to be there only long enough to see the Gettysburg Address. And the paradox of this, it really shows how advanced their time travel technologies were by this time. We're talking 1972. In some of these probes, certainly the chronovisor probes, I'm not certain about plasma confinement. They were actually able to see us where we were located in the quantum hologram. So I was anticipating being there for several hours, but really just long enough to see the Gettysburg Address. So I walked down to downtown Gettysburg, and I went up on some of the wooden sidewalks that were in front of the downtown Gettysburg a storefront.
So, Andy, there you are. You're little, you're shoeless, you're almost coatless, you're freezing, and you're walking into Gettysburg to see President Lincoln's address. What happens?
Well, I walked into downtown Gettysburg, which really didn't even resemble a downtown area. It was just really a cluster of buildings that looked like housing, with some of them with multiple stores occupying some of them. And I walked up onto the wooden sidewalk of one of them and looked into what we would call a millinery shop, which during the Civil War contained things like men's shoes and hats and cravats and walking sticks and so forth, gloves. And as I was doing so, an elderly man gambled on up to the wooden sidewalk. He was about 70 years old, and he was limping severely on one of his legs. And he began yelling at me, boy, what are you doing out here in the cold like this? You're going to catch your grip, which I take in the Civil War era must have meant catch a cold or a flu. And I've identified that man from historical photographs as a Gettysburg cobbler named John Lawrence Burns. Huh. John Burns was a citizen of Gettysburg. In fact, he was one of the first volunteers to the War of 1812 as a child. And when the Battle of Gettysburg swept through and past Gettysburg in July of 1863, he volunteered as a Union sharpshooter, was wounded in the hip, and was surrendered by Confederate forces under a flag of surrender back to the Union forces, and was discharged from the battlefield. And so when I identified this man from historical photographs and realized it was the man who then took me inside the millinery shop to outfit me with a jacket and shoes because he was concerned about my well-being, I really found three things that were quite startling historical correspondences. One, of course, was his appearance. The other was his injury. I mean, before I even knew and had identified him as John Burns, I was describing how this 70-year-old man was limping severely as he walked up onto the wooden sidewalk. Mm-hmm. And then the other linkage that quite serendipitously identified without initially knowing who he was his profession. He was a Gettysburg cobbler. So he took me in the shop, and we went to the back of the main floor of the store. It just was basically had a kind of a storage room behind that one-room floor space. And there was a shelf with multiple shelves that had used shoes on them. They weren't military boots. They were civilian shoes. And he took a pair of brown men's street shoes that must have been about a size 14. And he had me step into them, and he began actually shoving packing paper into the front of the shoes and was giving me this pair of secondhand shoes. He then took me into the storage room behind the shop and rummaged through a stack of about 40 men's jackets, most of them military issue, and outfitted me with a navy blue Union winter parka, which fit perfectly. And then as he was sort of smiling at me, he put a cap on my head. He then said, young man, I have to go. The President of the United States is arriving here today, and I have to see him. So he actually walked out of the shop, limping severely, ahead of me. And I followed him over to the dais where Lincoln was going to be soon arriving, walking along like a young boy, in his father's Sunday slippers. Like I could hardly even walk in these grossly oversized men's shoes. Now, over at the dais, which at that point only had maybe 10 or 15 people had already gathered, there was an open dais with nothing on top of it. It was just a big wooden area about, let's say, 20, I'd say maybe 15 or 20 feet deep and maybe 40 feet across, with patriotic red, white, and blue bunting around it, but no parapet or ceiling of any kind or pillars or anything. It was just a flat expanse of wood. And I went to the front of the dais because I've been told that I was going to be given the opportunity to see Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, and I was trying to overcome my fear of looking at him when he arrived. And I looked to my left, and there was my father, dressed as a Pennsylvania farmer.
So he went back there, too?
Well, he went back there, but he had left East Hanover on a previous day, but had been sent to the same day in history, November 19th of 1863.
Was he looking for you?
Today, if you were to take a trip in almost any direction across our great country, you might suddenly come upon a sign such as this: Atomic City. This means the location nearby of one of our atomic energy plants, a potent reminder that we now live in the atomic age. What are such communities like? Atomic cities, cities near atomic plants, are pleasant places of comfortable and well-built family homes. There are modern schools and churches, libraries, hospitals, post offices, and railroad depots. A few are government-owned, most are not. There are bustling business sections. With the ever-increasing use of nuclear energy, more towns may eventually become atomic cities, cities near safe and efficient atomic plants. Yes, our atomic city is exactly like any other, and special and detailed precautions are taken to keep these expanding communities that way. This golf course, for example, similar to thousands just like it all over the country, with well-tended greens and tricky traps. But if this player should send a long drive out of bounds, she might discover this man. He is protecting the people who live near an atomic installation by taking vegetation samples to test for the presence of radioactive materials. For example, thousands of samples are taken yearly in the region of Richland, Washington, where AEC's Hanford Works is located. Also tested are the water, the air, and the soil. Hundreds of thousands of samples are collected and analyzed yearly. There are many steps in this analysis, but one of the most important is counting for radioactivity in a device such as this. All year long, in the region of this and other atomic cities, crews range the countryside, taking earth, vegetation, and water samples. Should above standard amounts of radioactive substances be detected in an area, the atomic energy plant would take steps to control the amount of gases or smoke which might settle on the countryside. This would quickly reduce the levels of radioactivity. Here at Hanford are stored some 15,000 soil samples, classified as to type, depth, and time. Such surveys are typical of the lengths to which these scientists go in order to make certain that no occupant of any such city need ever fear the proximity of an atomic energy plant in which he or one of his neighbors might work. These samples are of great variety. They range from sand, loam, clay, gravel, and many others. Some types of soil retain radioactive materials longer than others. All contain some naturally occurring radioactive elements. Whatever their nature, the amount of radioactivity present will be determined at the laboratory here at Hanford. This will be done in several ways, including chemical tests. Such work as this goes on year after year with ever-increasing degrees of efficiency as we expand our atomic energy peacetime program. Everywhere in the vicinity of an atomic plant, the amount of radioactivity in the environs will be well sampled. At Hanford, a careful record is kept on a map. Ever stop to think that the breeze which rustles the flowers and trees and carries the scent of spring, the warmth of summer, and the spice of winter could be radioactive? To make certain that the air of cities near atomic installations is always safe, radiation detection shacks are installed. For instance, 16 of these are at Brookhaven. On the roof are Geiger counters and ionization chambers, which actuate the equipment inside the building. This instrument registers radiation. Here is a continuous flow dust monitor. This register panel records the data fed it by the automatic instruments. Such equipment makes it necessary to visit this shack only once weekly to collect the information. This camera takes a picture every 6 minutes and so produces a continuous record. But suppose you are a worker in an atomic energy plant located near one of these atomic cities. This is you coming home to your family. Aside from the usual safety precautions, what steps are taken to protect you at work? Matter of fact, there are many, so many that working in these plants is among the safest occupations in the world. Let's take a look at just one. This man is a lathe operator working on uranium. A hygiene engineer is about to take a sample of the dust in his vicinity. The instrument he is using is called a cascade impactor. An amazing thing about this device is the fact that it separates dust by particle size. A glass slide in the instrument has an adhesive surface to which the dust sticks. Such samples are taken at regular intervals in all places where there is any chance that the dust in the air may be radioactive. Now comes the analysis of the dust. This is the first step in an elaborate survey which will determine the amount of radiation in the sample. The technician removes the glass slide with the dust clinging to the adhesive and places it in a radiation counter. By reading the dials on this machine, the engineer can accurately gauge the amount of radiation in the dust being breathed in by the machine operator. Should an excessive amount of radiation register, steps to control it would be taken immediately. Samples go also to the laboratory, where they will be subjected to chemical analysis, as you see being done here. This test will determine the amount of uranium in the sample. This is but one of the many precautions taken by the Atomic Energy Commission to protect the workers at their jobs. But there is another problem facing the people of our atomic cities, a problem which is calling for the best efforts of our scientists. That is the matter of waste disposal. One of the foremost considerations of the Atomic Energy Commission is the safety of these people who work and live in cities near atomic plants. Therefore, waste material which might be potentially dangerous must be removed and stored safely. This work is vitally important. So let's see how the problem is handled at Knowles Atomic Laboratory at Schenectady in New York. You are looking at part of the control panel of the waste disposal plant. As one prominent scientist has said, the speed with which we are progressing in the development of atomic energy may depend largely upon the techniques we devise to dispose of atomic waste products. Here at Knowles, two phases of the problem are being handled. First, disposal of its own radioactive waste. Second, the study of waste problems for other AEC laboratories. This unit is one of the most complete and systematic plants of its kind in the country, capable of handling more than 2.5 million gallons of waste per year. The process is as follows. Radioactive wastes from all parts of the laboratory are collected in these stainless steel tanks. After one of them is full, a sample from it is analyzed and the contents are evaporated. The water comes off as a vapor, which is collected in other tanks. Another analysis follows. If the radioactivity is sufficiently low, the material is discharged. If not, it is treated again. This man is monitoring the cell door through which some waste material is about to emerge. By this time, the residue from the steel settling tanks has been pumped into vacuum dryer cells. In this condition, the material can be removed and disposed of. The drum dryer cell has concrete shielded walls and a lead and steel access door. The waste in casks will be removed by means of a small, remotely controlled railroad cart. The heavy door slowly opens, and the area is carefully monitored for safety purposes. Should there be too much radiation for safety, the door would be closed immediately. The heavy metal door is locked in place hydraulically. And now the cart containing the shielded casks with their burden of radioactive waste can be brought out on the floor. The contents of these two casks are the small residue from thousands of gallons of once highly radioactive waste. Now it has been concentrated to a point where the problem of disposal becomes much easier. It will be hoisted on this overhead crane to the balcony, put on a hand truck, and then taken away for storage or burial. It is a fact that the tempo of work and research in the atomic energy field in the future may be geared somewhat to the speed with which laboratories and installations are able to develop safe and sure processes to rid themselves of the potentially dangerous waste materials created by the very nature of the work. The problem is an international one, as atomic energy work spreads to other nations. Peacetime atomic energy has already brought the world great benefits in the field of medicine, agriculture, biology, industry, and many others. And it will bring more. It will protect your health, improve your food, bring you less costly living products, and a greater measure of leisure and security. It will do this partially through the development of power, tremendous power released by the tiny invisible atoms. This will be especially important in the power-starved areas in the world where routine fuels are scarce and expensive. And now the waste material is on its way to final disposal. Yes, on your travels across the continent, you may pass through several atomic cities. Some are large, some are small. But they are all good cities to live in which to raise your family, make friends, and enjoy a full life. Atomic cities, cities near atomic laboratories, will become more numerous as nuclear energy work expands, as we continue to travel into the atomic age. So continue your journey across the country. Who knows? Possibly your own community may one day become an atomic city through the magic
of his Board of Wage and Price Stabilization. In all likelihood, Mr. Rumsfeld, as the defense attaché to Project Pegasus, would have known about and possibly had control over the data about 9/11 derived via quantum access and brought back to the early 70s for analysis by the DARPA Research and Development Program under his administrative authority. Mr. Basiago's eyewitness account that Secretary Rumsfeld and others knew about 9/11 decades in advance because data about it was gathered via DARPA's secret time travel program unlocks several of the more enigmatic facts in the 9/11 literature and may be the key to society's unraveling of the ultimate accountability for the false flag operation that took place on September 11, 2001. We will explore Mr. Basiago's whistleblowing images of the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001 that had been obtained from the future and brought back to the early 1970s. DARPA is the chief research and development arm of the U.S. military. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, created the precursor to the Internet, ARPANET, and has a penchant for trumpeting its advances, such as putting surveillance cameras on the backs of bumblebees and other exotic achievements in military science. Mr. Basiago claims that DARPA's secret technical accomplishments go far beyond what it has publicly acknowledged, and that by 1970 DARPA had achieved teleportation-based time travel as I posted a photo of Andrew Basiago, who in 1972 went back to see Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, and the response was terrible. Almost everyone who gave it a thumbs down, as if to say this didn't happen. Andrew Basiago is an attorney today, practices in the state of Washington. Articulate, cogent, and credible. Not incredible, he is credible. I'm going to read you an article. I did a search. Here is the search I did. Basiago and Gettysburg were the only two words I used. 6,000 web pages. The second link on the Google Advanced Search, top line, meaning each word must appear on the page, as well as advanced electro-optical means of discerning past and future events via different technologies that provide quantum access. Mr. Basiago has described how, while serving in Project Pegasus, he viewed moving images of 9/11 at the secured U.S. Defense Technical Facility where they were processed after being retrieved from the future, the Aerojet Corporation facility that once stood at the corner of Bullock Avenue and Leroy Place in Socorro, New Mexico. According to Mr. Basiago's whistleblowing testimony, Donald H. Rumsfeld, the sitting U.S. Secretary of Defense on September 11, 2001, was the defense attaché to Project Pegasus during the early 1970s when Rumsfeld was officially serving as a counselor to President Nixon and member. The second link, executive producer.posterous.com, posted November 13, 2010. This is the article I'm reading. Let's get started. Andrew Basiago talks about Lincoln at Gettysburg. There's a photo of Lincoln. Andrew D. Basiago has emerged with evidence that secret U.S. time travel technologies were used as early as 1971 to acquire first-hand documentary knowledge about September 11, 2001, fully 3 decades before the horrific events of that fateful day. Mr. Basiago, a child participant in DARPA's time travel program, Project Pegasus, has publicly stated how in 1971 he viewed moving